Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. You've joined us. We're with Rabbi Joshua Neely, and we're at chapter 4 in the book of Hosea or Hoshea. And we're just going to jump straight in because we've got limited time. We're going to see how much we can get into this episode. Can you give us a little update on where we've got to so far, there, Rabbi? That in the story or the message that's been carried in chapter 1, 2, and 3?
So we have a story that goes back and forth between hope and reproach, where God is both castigating Israel and using the symbol of Hosea's visions of this woman that he's married to of being adulterous and therefore unfaithful, the way Israel has been unfaithful to God. And that's being also tempered by the idea that because it's a loving relationship and because God doesn't want the loss of this love of his life, that there will be an attempt to bring Israel back, and there will be a restoration. And that was something that was mentioned more forcefully in the last chapter, in chapter 3.
Okay, and we are now here at the beginning of chapter 4. Again, I'm reading from the free version of the Tanakh that you're going to find on Chabad.org. There are numerous other online versions. We'll have links to those under the video. Let us know what your favorite one is. And we'll get started in verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel, for the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, for there is neither truth nor loving kindness nor knowledge of God in the land. I'm going to go straight on to 2, I think, because they seem to carry on. There is swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery. They break all bounds, and blood touches blood. So you get the impression from this verse that there's a clear issue. It's not as if there's been a kind of a gentle derailing of the train. The train's hit the wall, and everyone's stealing everyone else's purses. I'm kind of curious because there's a theme, I think, of the words truth and loving kindness that flow through this chapter. And the parts I really want to ask you about are the ones which don't really make as much sense or don't jump out as much in the English, and they are the they break all bounds and blood touches blood parts.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, let me just, if I can just put a little preface to that. So This is, in chapter 4 is where we get a new, not exactly a new, but an expanded theme from Hosea. So he had been talking mostly just about Israel's unfaithfulness in terms of idolatry, in terms of them being attracted to these foreign gods and foreign worship. And what he's switching to in chapter 4 is basically by saying there's a consequence to that because there is no knowledge of God, there is no connection to God, then not only is that just, oh dear, we're not being loyal to God, but that has removed truth and removed kindness from the land, which is exhibited through all of these other behaviors. So it's not just that idolatry is a victimless crime. Idolatry is the fertile soil which breeds all of these other crimes. And there is a direct connection from one to the other. So,
is there then a difference or in between doing bad things and not doing Torah? I assume when they say truth, they're talking about the truth that God gave Israel to walk by. And you've got one group of people that never knew the Torah and live the way they do. That's going to be a different kind of bad or paganism or idolatry than a group of people that were given instruction and chose not to do it or walked away from it.
Right. I mean, the rebellious is different than the person who was never educated in the right path in the first place. Now, of course, I mean, Judaism believes that all nations do have a basic and innate sense of what is right, and if they choose to do wrong, they're therefore still held accountable for the wrong. But the Israelites were given a way to understand and do more than just their innate sense. They were given this leg up, this wonderful cheat sheet called the Torah, which was supposed to allow them to have access to God much more easily and therefore have a much better life than trying to figure it out on their own. And for them to turn away from that is not just silly, it is rebellious, and that is one of the reasons why idolatry in Israel leads so inexorably to all of these other activities, because once they have made that basic betrayal as opposed to confusion, then they are much more empowered to commit these other crimes.
Okay. And they give some examples here, right? There is swearing, and I'm assuming that's rather than what we'd call swearing today, it's pledging oaths and promises.
More specifically, false ones.
Right.
So this is, swearing something to be true or swearing that you didn't do something when in fact you did. But yes, this is not using bad language.
Mm. And lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, all of the bad ones. It's like a tick list of everything you shouldn't do. And that goes on to the interesting part. Well, I say interesting. Yeah. I'm sure the other parts have their own specific interest.
The unusual language.
Right. They break all bounds. And so I was looking this up. I found a few different explanations of this. And I'm curious as to what your take is and how you would explain it.
So the verb that's being used here, partsu, is or rather paratsu, is the verb for bursting forth. Like sort of shooting out beyond as they put it in the translation, bounds. Right. So there's lots of different ways to translate this. You could either say that all of these things are the verb, the verb is in the plural third person. These are bursting forth onto the scene, like they are rampant, you might say. So you could use this as a modifier, that false swearing, dishonesty, murder, adultery, all of these are just rampant. And that paratsu could be connected to that. The trope doesn't necessarily work that way. The trope sort of says this is the beginning of the next part of the sentence, rather than the verb concluding the list of nouns we just had. So therefore you have to say, well, what is the pronoun that's implied by this third-person plural they? And so that's where the translation you're reading from is saying they burst forth, meaning the Israelites, meaning they go past all the boundaries of what is right and wrong. Like nothing is sacred. They are willing to trample every law and every norm of good behavior. And then this blood follows, or blood touches upon blood, is most likely trying to refer to an image that one crime is not even completed before the next crime is committed. That there's no gap between them, as is used in other prophetic allusions for positive things. When the harvester will meet the thresher, meaning that there won't even be the usual gap between different cycles. In this particular negative sense, it's like, one murder isn't even finished before another one's already being committed.
I've read a few different versions of that. When I first read they break all bounds, the line that came to me was the line in the Torah that talks about you having boundary stones and your and not moving them to make your area bigger. And the Torah itself is a series of boundary stones on what you should and shouldn't do in your daily life, and that they are breaking those boundaries by doing those things. But I read about how it was by some sages will say that it's talking about bearing children outside of their families, or a whole load of things. It was very interesting. And if people at home have other interpretations, link them in the comment section. It's an interesting read. Okay, so we go on to verse 3. Therefore shall the land mourn, and all that dwell wherein shall be cut off, along with the beasts of the field, the fowl of the heavens, and the fish of the sea shall be diminished. I immediately got the impression that this is I don't know how to put this into... It's awkward because I'm reading this, and there's one part of me which says this is something that one group of people will say has happened, but you can also read it as kind of a last days movie script, right? This is the play on what's going to happen in the future, because we can obviously see that these things haven't happened yet. We'll read on and we'll find out. But then there are people that say they have happened.
Right.
We're just not reading our list of actors isn't maybe the list of actors that we should be assigning to the names that are in this. And the beasts of the fields aren't necessarily the beasts of the fields, and the fish in the sea aren't necessarily the fish in the sea. I probably made that much more confusing than it needs to be. It's just interesting that it can be two or three things at once, and there's only a few words there. So, first of all, cut off. It's a simple term, but it literally means diminished, right? It won't exist anymore. It's not going to be there.
Right. I mean, it's not the usual word that translation that's used for cut off, karet, to mean excised. It's more a word meaning to, like you said, diminished or to suffer deprivation. So it doesn't necessarily mean extinct in the same way that the word cut off might mean extinct if you were looking in the thesaurus.
Okay.
So, and that maybe comes back to the quandary of who is this talking about. And chapter 4 definitely begins talking about direct rebuke to the people of Hosea's own day. And he's laying out very clearly, you have been idolaters, here are the other crimes you have committed, and understand that just as these crimes follow from the crime of idolatry, these consequences to the natural world around you will follow from these crimes and all of your other crimes that you are committing. Meaning that the land is not going to remain good if you are polluting it with your behaviors. And you can't say, because that's, this is the wonderful logic that Hosea puts into here without saying he's using logic, which is everybody who commits sins always has their own explanation or rationalization of why they don't need to stop. Right? So you start with the sin of idolatry, and so now you don't have to worry about God telling you you shouldn't because, hey, my idol says it's fine. And then you also can say, but anyway, idolatry is innocent. I mean, what difference does it make if I worship a statue? And then he comes with the lines of all the other crimes and says, yeah, but once you begin doing that, this is what comes with it. And then someone else might say, truly callous and heartless, well, yeah, but as long as I'm not the one being robbed and I'm not the one being murdered and I'm not the one being adulterated, then, hey, I'm winning. And verse 3 comes in and says, yeah, up until the point where your entire land collapses underneath the weight of all of this activity. In which point, I don't care how much you think you've been insulated from the negative activities going on around you because you've always been the perpetrator rather than the victim, you too will end up suffering eventually from the cumulative effect of all of this.
All right, so on to 4. Surely let no man strive and let no man reprove, for your people are like them who strive with the priest. I think probably I'll add on 5 there. Therefore you shall stumble in the daytime, and the prophet that is with you shall also stumble with you in the night. We'll talk about that line in a moment. And I will silence your mother, and we'll definitely go on to that, because I know it's probably a few people that'd be interested in how to do that. So we've covered this word strive before. The translation I'm reading from and the use of the word is, I'm going to guess, can you tell me what your verse says?
So the translation that I'm reading off of Sepharia has, let no man rebuke, let no man protest. And very accurately, I believe, they put that into quotation marks, which means that this is the cry that goes up among the wicked of Israel. They're saying no one should give rebuke, no one should protest, let no one strive over all of this. Right, meaning that no one should argue about this. It's okay. Everything's okay. Everything's okay. We're not doing anything wrong. Anyone who says we're doing something wrong, shut up. Right, this is the last ditch effort of the sinner, which is they don't want to hear that they're doing something wrong. And for that, the second half of the verse, right, the Kohen, the priest, well, the people have a complaint against him then. I mean, the people are not complaining against the priest, but essentially because the priest has allowed himself to be silent, because the priest has allowed himself, especially in the northern kingdom, to be co-opted by the corrupt government and the corruption of the people now have a grievance against the priest who they have corrupted, because they told him to shut up, and he did. And that's not the priest's job.
Yeah, I'm thinking about there are congregations like that now, where in all religions, where the guy who should be in charge and guiding is actually kind of taking the back seat and letting things happen, which shouldn't happen, because he wants to protect his position or his job, and I shouldn't maybe have. It's not a mirror that I want to hold up, but it happens everywhere, and I can see how that's a very human thing. Now, I've read...
I should also point out, and sometimes the person isn't just taking the backseat, they've taken the lead. They're going along, well, actually, this isn't such a bad thing. Because we get to have greater power, greater authority. Some of the priests up in the north may have felt slighted by not being the key priests in Jerusalem, so maybe helping the kings to erect the idols in the north, that's giving them a new role. And so maybe they're not only are they simply taking a back seat because they're afraid of the people, they might be eagerly participating because it gives them new status.
Yep, I can see that. All right. Therefore, you shall stumble in the daytime, and the prophet that is with you shall also stumble with you in the night. And I've read, shall stumble as though it is the night, for that line. And I will silence your mother. So can you explain what this stumbling is? And because stumble turns up a few times in the Tanakh in different ways. Physically stumbling, that you shouldn't put a stumbling block in front of people.
Same verb as the stumbling block, yes.
Okay, great. So it's it does mean to physically find it difficult to move.
It does mean to physically find it difficult to move smoothly. It also, in both prophetic and rabbinic language, means to continually come to error, to constantly make mistakes because you've now deceived yourself about what is right or wrong, or someone else has deceived you. And that's really what's happening here, is that the people have stopped the source of information. They've stopped the source of proper instruction. And so they're going to stumble. And even the prophets, even those who should be giving good instruction, will also stumble. Now, like you said, there's a couple different ways to handle the prophetic side here. One is to simply say, well, these are the false prophets. And that there were numerous of them. And when you read throughout the books of the prophets, and especially in the books of Kings, you see that prophet wasn't always a noble profession. That many people who were called prophets were nothing more than mouthpieces and lackeys for a corrupt government and corrupt priesthood that simply would, shake and say, oh, God wants this, or insert name of idol wants this. But on the other hand, you also have here the notion that gets perhaps reflected in other parts of the Tanakh, where even righteous prophets who had clear visions from God were hesitant to share them with the people. They were unsure of whether it would be received, unsure of whether it was true prophecy, and sometimes they would shirk their duty, or at least shrink back from the duty. There may also be here in the notion with Lila the fact that much of rabbinic literature believes that the vast majority of the prophetic visions occurred to the prophets during a dream state. So this may be saying that even when they were given their visions at night, they did not share them as needed to give instruction in the day.
That's great. I hadn't read that. I like that a lot. That kind of makes sense. And it's worth mentioning now that a lot of people at home will be reading The Prophet and asking themselves, well, surely the only prophet in this story is the one who wrote this down, or the one this is about. But prophet is, as a word, it can be a plural, right? It's like sheep.
Yes, or like Kohen, like priest. It doesn't necessarily mean a singular priest. It means the category, the profession of prophet, not necessarily any individual. And plus, the definite article the does not appear in the Hebrew for this, right? It says gam navi, right? Also a prophet, will stumble. So it's not necessarily saying the prophet in the sense that we would have to then find the antecedent for the definite article. The Hebrew does not include the definite article, even if some translations do.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to help, but sometimes it doesn't. It's like that other great line where it says, I shall raise for you a prophet, and everyone goes, which one? You go, no, it's like, generally.
in general and repeatedly.
Yep.
And that has maybe a little good caveat that anytime you have a particular insight on a text, this is not just you, I mean anyone in general, anytime you think you have a particular insight in the text that's really interesting and novel, and it hinges entirely on one single word, double check the Hebrew, double check other translations, make sure that word is an incontrovertible part of the text and not simply a choice by whoever translated it for you.
Now, tell me how I can silence your mother, or anybody's mother.
So, Safaria, again, the translation they're using gives an alternative, which is, I will destroy your kindred, which radically changes the tone of that, which shows some of the difficulty of reading these prophetic, poetic expressions. So silencing your mother could be going back to read it in the more literal term, it could be going back to the first 3 chapters. Well, in particular, the first 2 chapters where Hosea is rebuking the mother, that is to say, rebuking the adulterous woman who stands in as this source of the strife because of the betrayal of God, as a stand-in for Israel as a whole. So silencing the mother may be simply saying, silence the voices of idolatry that have led you down to this path. And then, that would make sense if we then go into verse 6, where they're pinning the blame for all of this, the sins that came afterwards, and then the destruction of the land around them, and then the destruction of the people, the stumbling. That may be pinned because of this original problem with idolatry, which was attached to the mother figure in the first 2 chapters of Hosea. So silencing the mother may be the beginning of the fix for all of this problem, because that was the source of the problem. On the other hand, this may not be going back that far, and it may be going more like the Sepharia translation, which is simply to say, your line will be silenced. Your mother will no longer be giving birth. It will be the end of your family, and it may be the final statement of the catastrophe, rather than going back to the beginning of the cause of the catastrophe.
Wow. Okay. The next line is kind of interesting for me, coming from a Christian tradition when I was growing up, and then morphing out into this Hebrew roots movement, which ultimately led me to discredit the whole Christian thing. One of the lines that's often quoted is this next verse: "My people were silenced for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I will also reject you from being a priest to me. Seeing that you have forgotten the Torah of your God, I too will forget your children." Now, usually we'll only get the one part, so the kind of rallying cry to go back and read your Old Testament, and go back and read your Tanakh, and go back and read your Torah is, "My people were silenced for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge." That's the end normally. The next bit would be a little bit too Jewish, I think, for that, and kind of incur an ownership to a group of people that it wasn't that at that point wasn't being projected to, and that you're not Jewish, but it's okay for you to do the Torah. But obviously, the whole thing here is completely designed to go towards the people of Israel.
Yes,
I like that now it's actually mentioning the Torah as a thing, and it's linking Torah suddenly to this lack of knowledge, and it's saying the knowledge that it mentioned at the beginning. Now we're getting a little bit more information on what that knowledge is, and it's this instruction that they're not doing.
So 2 things. One, as you say, this statement is definitely directed towards the people of Israel, but it's also a wonderful example of prophetic momentary hyperbole, if you will. Right? Because if you were to only read this verse, you found this verse on a piece of paper floating around somewhere, you would think, oh, that's it, we're done. But when you read the rest of Hosea, it's clear that no matter how many times God says, I'm rejecting you, very shortly thereafter, or if not a few verses before, God is saying, and I'm taking you back in love. So this notion of rejection is not something that should be taken more than a statement of extreme rebuke, not necessarily as a statement of a final legal status of the relationship between Israel and God. The term Torah is very interesting in this verse, as well as throughout the prophets, because the word Torah does not automatically mean Torah the way most people think of the word Torah today. That is to say, the Torah is a perfectly fine, standalone Hebrew word, and it's used in contexts and in meanings other than the first 5 books that came with Moses and that are currently wrapped and sitting in the ark in my congregation. Torah simply means instruction. And what's being described here may be more just the idea that God has given us instruction and guidance, and we have rejected it. And we have chosen to forget it. And that's both more than and narrower than the Torah itself, meaning the first 5 books. So this is not necessarily a case that if you forget who begat whom, then you're in trouble, which would be perhaps a hyper-literal reading of the word, you forgot God's Torah.
Sure.
But instead, it could just simply be, you forgot what God told you. You forgot what God taught you. To be with God and to follow God's ways. That could be the narrowest understanding of this instruction of God. Or it could be the most expansive, which is God has told you all these things that are the way to live. And you seem to be forgetting all of them. And above and beyond just the actual mitzvot of the Torah, you're forgetting even all the instructions the prophets have given you to try and encourage you to keep all of those commandments. It's you guys are idiots.
The part here that says, I will also reject you from being a priest to me, that's not specifically to the priests, it's to a nation of priests?
Maybe.
Okay, yeah, it's a question.
so yes, it can go both ways, right? So Israel is called a nation of priests in the Torah, capital T Torah there, not instructions Torah. But we've also just recently seen in a couple verses above the Kohen being reprimanded by God. So you could read this verse as either saying God is so angry that he is almost prepared to no longer have Israel be a national priesthood for him, or it could be that God is saying both the people and the priests are in trouble because of what they have done.
There does seem to be in the next, I think it's verse 8, a direct reference that makes it sound as if that's explicitly to the priest, but we'll do that in a second. The more they have increased, the more they have sinned against me. I will exchange their honor for shame. Now, I could easily read that as something that's directed towards the priests. Their honor being something that they're increasing by kind of doing whatever the locals are doing, by fulfilling the will of the people.
And the more inappropriate sacrifices the priests perform, the more sins they're actually doing, no matter how much they may think they're doing. Hey, I'm doing more sacrifices, God has to be happy. It's like, no, but if you're doing them in entirely the wrong way and misleading the people, you're not making things better by doing more, you're making them worse.
Is the
sorry, just because I love to always remember my grandfather, may he rest in peace. He used to always have a joke that there was a car dealer in San Diego that used to have commercials on TV that said, "We lose money on every sale, but we make it up in volume." And that may be what's being described in this verse. Right. Oh, sure, we may be doing something wrong, but we do a lot of it.
Yeah. I think it's not a real ad, was it?
No, my grandfather, may he rest in peace, and he was known also for hyperbole and exaggerating, but he said this was an ad that ran on TV in San Diego.
Wow. That's great. Which actually brings me on to my next question. It says the more they have increased, and naturally your brain clicks in and you think populace. But when you look at things in the Bible, often increase means kind of physical gain. A person can increase in many things. It doesn't necessarily mean he has lots of kids. Is there a clue in the text as to whether they're talking about the families getting larger or the people getting richer, or are you just going to say yes?
I'm just going to say yes, exactly. Right. So it comes from the basic root for being more. And that can be many different forms of being more. Interestingly enough, however, that root is very similar to the same root that we've been talking about, meaning contention or strife.
Okay.
So it is an interesting poetic overlap between the two. But not that I would necessarily say that they're the same root, but there's definitely I think a poetic flourish by the author here of using the same what's the term, assonance between the words.
Okay, so on to 8. They feed on their sin offerings of my people, and set their heart on their iniquity. So actually, the feed on the sin offerings of my people seemed quite simple to understand, and I love the fact that it's still my people, it's not your people or their people, and set their heart on their iniquity led to me reading a little bit more, and what I read was, and you can tell me if I found the right answer, was that the priests were kind of yearning for the people to bring these sin offerings, yearning for the people to make mistakes, because the mistakes resulted in them bringing them food.
Exactly right. I think that's the most direct explanation of that verse. It's kind of the equivalent of imagine a doctor who gets paid every time someone gets sick. Are they really going to be encouraged to help you stay healthy? Mm-hmm. Right? No, they're going to, excuse me, not trying to say that all doctors are like that, obviously not. But bad doctors who were being paid or rewarded, in a sense, because of the failings of their patients, might have less incentive to prevent their patients from failing. And here we see the unintended consequences that since the priests do get to eat part of the sin offering, well, then why should I bother teaching the people how to avoid sin? I'll just do the sacrifices when they come after the fact, and then I'll get fatter. So, it just makes more sense to me as a priest not to bother trying to teach them correctly.
Yeah, it's an interesting line. It struck me that if you have a religion based on telling people what they do wrong all the time, rather than how they can do right, then you're always going to have a full congregation. But if you are practicing a religion where you're in charge of helping people, then eventually, if you're doing your job properly, your meeting should be pretty empty. It's interesting. Right, I think unless you have something else you want to add.
Nope, I think that's good up through verse 8, and we'll push on when we get to the next part of the chapter.
Grand. So you guys at home, if you would like to finish this chapter with us, you can just, you will eventually be able to click the next button when we've got it recorded, which should be in about a week's time. And in the meantime, thank you very much, Rabbi Neely, for helping us and guiding us through this book.
Thank you.
You guys at home, thank you for subscribing. If you haven't, please do like the video, share it on all of your social media, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.